Hello everyone, I'm Alper Markov and it's interview time again, and today's interview is with Lars Grant-West. So I don't want to wait, so let's go to the interview. So
Right.
thank you for taking the time to interview today.
Sure.
I guess the first question that sort of a statement that I'm going to make is I would say you're one of the more animal known painters of Magic the Gathering, right?
I think so. I mean, there's so many good people out there doing this stuff now that there's some phenomenal work out there. So,
And you were born in New York City, right?
yes, Brooklyn. Yeah.
Brooklyn. But so do you think that being born in New York City, and I'd read that your father took you to the American Museum of Natural History in the Bronx Zoo. Do you think that that would have been the case, that you would have been so interested in animals had you not been raised in New York?
That's it. It's a really good question. I think a lot of what I did as a kid, going to the museum in a place where there weren't animals, there wasn't a lot of nature, was a big thing for me. And let me just adjust the camera. I feel like I'm not looking directly at you. It certainly inspired a love of animals. And then when I was like around seven, we moved up to northwest corner of Connecticut. So comparatively speaking, really, really rural. And little more exposure to animals, but I was able to, it was the time when your parents would say, go out, I don't want to see you till dinner.
Right.
And we would go out and collect salamanders and, look for deer sheds and things like that. And so it was a big culture shift for me as a kid. But the interest in animals, and the museum got this interest in skulls and skeletons going when I was really, really young. And then that kind of translated over into live animals, just this fascination with living things.
When you said the museum, do you mean the Museum of American Modern History?
American Museum of Natural History.
I'm sorry, Natural History.
Yep. But I'm from the time when T-Rexes dragged their tails and stood upright, and so the science has changed a lot since then.
I mean, that museum is amazing. I've been there once, and well, actually twice, but I spent 8 hours there, and I barely touched the surface of what they have.
Yep. Yeah, it's an amazing place. And I think, if I had stayed in New York, I can totally imagine myself sitting there for a 12-hour day, just cleaning off, trilobite fossils or something like that. I mean, I just get such a kick out of that end of things too.
Yeah, that picture of you and your brother there is pretty awesome, gotta say.
Yeah, I was a smug little kid. I thought I knew it all then too, I guess.
So it makes sense then that your transition into working at a zoo was something that you went into, but tell us about how you transitioned into role-playing art and Dungeons and Dragons from working at the zoo.
Yeah, so the zoo thing was, it was one of those jobs that you never expect to get into. And I was there for around 12 years. I think about 6 years into that, I got my first, I may have the chronology wrong, but I got my first job for Wizards of the Coast. And I think that was 1993. It was an art director named Paul Hanchat, who's not there anymore, asked if I would do some illustrations for Draconomicon. And this was before most of the D&D Draconomicon stuff. So I was working at the zoo, and actually when I got that call, I was in Guadalajara, Mexico, doing a seminar on inexpensive ways to build animal exhibits.
Really?
To sculpting rocks and trees and stuff out of concrete. So to come home and have this, or to come back to our hotel and have a call there from somebody from Wizards of the Coast saying, "Hey, you want to do this book?" Really got me stoked, and that was my first introduction to Wizards of the Coast. I had done stuff for children's books before, and children's magazines, and a couple of science fiction magazines, but nothing to this scale.
Do you remember your first assignment for Magic?
I do. The first thing I did for Magic was Toxin Sliver, and
nice.
Actually, yeah. So.
Oh, wow.
That's it right there. And this is, I think I've done one piece that was smaller than this. All my pieces since tend to be a lot larger.
Yeah, because I had read that you had originally sent your pieces in instead of photographing them, and then a couple of them got lost.
No, well, there was a time when it just took a while to get things back. So the Tormod's Crypt right there that was probably, it was, well, I can show you another.
Yes, please do.
So I don't have Tormod's Crypt now. A collector picked that up a while ago. So this is about the size of Let me fix the camera here. So this was about the size of Tormod's Crypt minus maybe this much.
Wow.
So 24 by, I don't remember the exact width, but maybe 32 or something like that. And for a while, I was just painting on these MDF boards from Home Depot, 2 by 4 foot sheets of masonite, and I would just prime them and work on those. And so I'd end up with these enormous paintings, relatively enormous paintings. But sorry, I'm getting off the track here.
No, this is fantastic. I mean, getting to see original artwork like held up to the camera. I mean, like by all means. I mean, feel free. That's not a problem.
I can get a little closer if you want. So this is Thunderherd Migration, and the light's not great here. And oddly, I'll tell you one weird little secret thing. If you look at a lot of my paintings, you'll see the place that I had a lot of fun is in one corner.
Yes.
I love corners for some reason, and if it's an assignment that is not something, or it's say it's a setting where there's something I'd really like to play with a little more, I look at the corners as a place to play a little bit.
Yeah, I saw in the Godzilla piece you did, which by the way, that must have been an awesome gig to get for that. But there's 2 little people in the corner, in the bottom right-hand corner.
Yeah, I wish I could say that was my idea. That was an Easter egg. That was, I believe, Tom Jenkott, the art director for that, is the one who assigned that. But those are the 2 little twins that sing to Mothra.
Oh.
And so those aren't just there for scale. I was specifically asked to put those in there, and I'm surprised you noticed them. You didn't see those on the actual card, did you?
No. I mean, I don't believe so, but I did see them on the website because I don't know if those are on the card themselves. I have one, but it's sometimes you can miss this stuff, real easy because of the size of the printing.
Right, and that's part of the fun of it. So years ago, I did Melancholy, which is a giant kind of just sitting there all slouched and kind of dejected. And there's a little guy standing there like this. And if you look near the giant's feet, or where he's sitting, he's sat on the guy's outhouse.
Oh no.
So the giant is not the only melancholy person in that team. This guy's got business to deal with and has no place to go do it.
So that's awesome. I mean, what are some other little like things that you put into paintings that now that we're on the subject?
Ooh, I don't know. I'd have to think back a ways. If you look at Mammoth Spider, for example, there's some architecture up in the corner, up in that scene. There's some kind of elvish architecture that I had a lot of fun with. It's all covered with spider webs but that was just some neat sculptural stuff. And sometimes I get in the mood where I just want to do architecture, and so I just threw some of that in there. Areas that I really enjoy painting, Vein Drinker.
Yeah, that's amazing.
There's a bat head right it's actually a big bat head, but I really loved painting that. I love skulls and skeletons. And so that's another thing that I like to play with a lot is, I like to print 3D print reference. So this, and the light is horrible on this, but this is a bat skull blown up to a foot long from just a few millimeters long.
Can you imagine that if that was that size?
There's a lot of these things. Hedgehogs would be terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And that's why, like, I've gotten the chance to do a couple of molds for Magic, and they're just so much fun because they have these teeth that are just massive. They're made for, it's like, imagine if people had to bite through a lobster. That's what these animals have to do. So they have these big, chunky, spiky teeth. that rival almost anything you would see anywhere in fantasy. In the natural world, they're just this big. So
yeah, when they're brought to a big scale, they really are like terrifying. Yeah. Like you'd think, oh Lord.
That's a hedgehog skull right there. Very, very tiny. And these teeth are not a great example, but they're actually, you know, as insectivores go, these are fairly mild. But you get into something like a bat, they have these enormous incisors and very specialized teeth that are designed to crush through the shells of the things that they eat.
I mean, there must have been some sort of like ancient predecessor that was, I mean, maybe at least bigger, that would have scared the hell out of us.
And that's what magic lets us show. You know, I mean, that's where you kind of get the opportunity to push that even further. The I forgot the name of it. The mole for Ikoria that I did.
Excavation?
No. Yes, excavation mole. Thank you. That was based on the skull of a limbless lizard that had this big kind of wedge on top of its head. The skull does. You don't see it in the finished animal, but the actual there's meat and skin over that. But when you actually look at the skull, it looks like the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's like this really terrifying biology that's just astonishing.
That's awesome. I mean, it's fascinating but you know, I never really thought about that, but you know, especially if you are, you know, doing artwork for animals, you do get a chance to sort of create your own alternate reality prehistoric universe.
Yeah, and I think if there's one thing I've not been thrilled with the way that I've handled magic to some degree in the past, it's that I didn't push those designs far enough. And that's what I get so much of a charge out of when I look at the way that a lot of people are doing these things now, is you'll see, you know, tusks. I remember Sam Burley did a painting of a boar that just had these crazy tusks. And I look at things like that and I think that wouldn't make sense in the real world, but then nature actually proves me wrong, and there's something crazy out there that's just as wild as that. So,
well, you've been working with, you know, you've been working in this industry for 20 years, which I'd imagine there were certain like roads that needed to be cleared in order for maybe artists nowadays to sort of have an easier path to getting to sort of push production or push artistic design or whatnot.
Yeah, I wish I had you as like my press secretary or something like that, because that's a perfect justification. I like to keep things around that are examples of, I'm gonna see if I can lift this off here. So those are some of the skulls that I have
Wow.
that are just examples of kind of the parameters that nature has for so these are different. I've got some 4-horned and 3-horned and 5-horned goats up there. So that's just examples of different things that the natural world has done. And this gives me a chance to, you know, every once in a while, I kind of look over and say, yeah, you know what? You're not doing so well. You got to kick it up a notch. Nature's got you beat still.
Yeah, there's really no way to top the creativity of the natural world.
Yeah.
How do you think that the industry has changed in the past 20 years that you've been in it, as far as how artists work?
Well, when I graduated from School of Visual Arts in 1990, and my graduation present for my parents was a fax machine. So that's the thing right there. Like the internet, like you didn't email. I mean, I didn't anyway. I mean, you could email, you know, with the dial-up, the old AOL kind of dial-up thing. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't a practical way to do business. So, and you certainly couldn't send, you know, big images. And now I would say, you know, you work on a sketch, you get an assignment FedEx to you in an envelope, you'd open it up, you'd look at it, do your sketches, work your sketches up. And for me, that usually involved layers of tracing paper. So I would try to feed that into the fax machine. Ooh. My fax, you know, whenever I finally got rid of it, I'm sure it was just a wreck. I don't even remember when that happened. But I remember my fax machine a few times just gagging on the layers of paper I was trying to force through it.
Right.
So you would, and wax pencil and stuff like that. So you would do a job that way, and then you'd paint the job, and then you'd FedEx it out to the client. And now, and that's sort of, that was when I got into magic. That was the way a lot of it was done. It was still sort of in that arena. And and FedExing the job out, rushing to FedEx, 2 days before the due date, to
Right.
try to get it there, on time, or the day before or whatever. And now the biggest, I end up just photographing the art here and shooting it over to him. So
Yeah, because I read that back in the day, you had to do multiple photographs, right, of high resolution, and I'd imagine it was 35 millimeter.
yeah, I still do the same thing. So for that Thunderherd migration, it's probably, the actual file that I sent them is probably made up of 40 separate shots. So I take one, and I do, it's overkill. I don't need to, this is just me being a little bit OCD about trying to get a high resolution image in there, or just getting one to have in the computer so I can do something with it down the road.
Right, because if something happens, who you can never know. I mean, paintings are.
Yeah, it's gone. Yeah, if something ever happens, it's done for. So so most of the images that I have, if you actually took the full image of Thunderherd migration, you could blow it up and you could see eyelashes, that might have dropped in, or the occasional dog hair or something.
Do you still do 35 millimeter?
No, it's digital. It's all digital. But I'm taking say, across the top, there might be 20 images layered on top of each other, overlapping by 50%. And each one is 3,000 pixels wide. So then bringing it into Photoshop and putting it all together is, that takes time. It's a very time consuming process. And really, I should just shoot it in one, with one shot of the digital camera and be done with it.
Well, I mean, you got to go through whatever process you have. Now, a question I have about a specific piece was, now I read that Glimmervoid, you mentioned that you thought somehow you might have pissed off the art director because you wrote like, what did I do? And my first question is, what exactly made you think that he or she was pissed off? Because I mean,
yeah,
you didn't quite tell us.
Yeah, no, I meant that kind of in jest. The art director at the time who gave me that assignment was Jeremy Cranford, who's working on Hearthstone now, I think. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing of drawing, so that the assignment was to draw a featureless metal plane lit by the light of 5 suns it was actually, so that would make sense with magic. And then it had to have this hexagonal grid, the whole Mirrodin grid flowing across this landscape. Working that out in perspective is a nightmare from an artistic standpoint. Not, first of all, that this rolling plane, which is a pretty standard thing in fantasy illustration, you've got this pastoral scene, but then you make it all out of metal, and you're dealing with the way that light bounces from each of these suns off of something else, and then you're trying to take a grid, even just a square grid, like a piece of graph paper mapped across that kind of a surface, is not an easy thing to do freehand. There's no rulers involved. You just kind of have to make it all up. So I ended up resorting to a piece of 3D software that isn't even available anymore, called Bryce. And I don't know for sure. I think that may be the first, and I'm just taking this on my, adding this to my pile of whatever. I think that may be the first fully 3D modeled land in Magic.
I'd imagine so. I haven't heard anybody say anything otherwise.
Yeah, and well, it's probably because it doesn't really matter to most people. But I actually submitted that one because the complexity, that image, Bryce only lets you render one sun at a time. So you can only have one big light source like that. It was a pretty primitive program, but also very powerful. So I rendered each light separately, and then I had to render an image of the light, an image of the shadow, and then kind of an image in between just to deal with reflections. And then all those images for each sun had to be composited into one image in Photoshop. So the file I sent was actually, it was super low resolution. It literally was, I think, the pixel size that 800 pixels wide or something. It was exactly what they needed to do a card.
So I mean, if you'd been any smaller, it might have been no good.
Oh yeah, it was ridiculously tiny. Yeah, so that was, I would say, that one was, it was really complex. From an artist standpoint, I just remember sitting there looking at the assignment and going, how the hell am I going to do this? Like, it's just crazy. But the software let me do all those things.
It ended up becoming an iconic piece.
Yeah, and I wish I had painted it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, like, I know you said you wouldn't do it, but I mean, it would be a cool thing to try out. I mean, do an analog version of Glimmervoid.
I have thought about it. I think, I don't know, you know, if you actually look at the image, a big version of the image, and I have an old Macintosh G4 that will still run this Bryce software. And so I rendered a larger version of it. And I actually tried a few different versions in like a nighttime version of Glimmervoid just to see what it would look like.
Ooh.
So some low light, I tried running some clouds across it and doing some other things. And it was fun to play with. I may try
5 moons. Do you think? Did you do like 5 moons? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but.
No, I didn't. But that's an interesting thought, because I guess that would, well, I guess you could have as many moons or as many. No, it didn't even occur to me to do 5 moons. I think I just had the kind of the black moon, and then I had some other of the suns on a very low on the horizon. So there was this kind of raking light coming across it. And light from the horizon. So all the metal was kind of just, there was light just bouncing around that metal surface. So that would be really cool. I think it would be fun to do several different Glimmervoids that are different, you know, different times of day or whatever.
Yeah, like a variation set or something.
Yeah, we were like with different colored suns dominating each cycle or something. You know?
I mean, as a fan, that would be fantastic to see, because I know it's difficult for artists to go back, but like, this is a really cool example of how you could revisit a piece and it still be a challenging thing to do.
Yeah, and it would be. It would, I think I would have to go back again to my college days and bring out an airbrush and actually try doing some, the gradients on that, the blending on that would have to be so subtle. I don't even know that I want to do it in oils. I might even have to try like you know, watercolors and just do very light washes to build that up.
Well, I vote for it. I vote for it indeed. As far as when you do humanoid or humans, it seems to me that you get most of your assignments, you get sort of the baddies.
Yeah, which is good. Like, I think my favorite so far was, well, I really like Glowspore Shaman and Corrodes the Monitor. And you know, so yeah, I'd rather women than men. And I like the ones that are interesting and powerful and fun. Vein Drinker was a fun piece too. I still look at that. Some of the bats I wish I could paint again, but I liked the way I painted her. You know,
was she based off of a model?
A lot of sketching, a lot of sketching and correcting and sketching and correcting. The other thing too is in my studio. So I have a music stand right here, and that's got a couple of mirrors on it. This thing right here. And so as I'm working, that's one of the art tricks for looking for mistakes. If you don't have somebody else that you trust in the room who can say, yeah, you messed up that wrist, you got to fix that. The mirror is kind of the next best thing. You can, so while I'm working, I can be sitting here painting and just turn around and take a look. And a lot of times if there's a drawing error or just my brush made a mark that looks weird and I don't see it looking at it in the right direction, for some reason, that makes the view kind of a brand new view, and all of a sudden you see the mistakes.
That makes sense. I mean, because when you do see it through, it is through like another lens, so to speak. It's reflecting from an area that's not where your eyeballs are at.
Yeah, and the digital analog is you just flip, you flip the view back and forth as you're working, and I do the same thing all the time.
With being a teacher, is this like the type of stuff that you incorporate into your classes? Do you tell these techniques? And what advice would you have for young people trying to get into this industry during these trying times?
Yeah, I think it's difficult now, obviously without conventions going on. It's there's so many people out there trying to get into the industry, and I was fortunate in that when I was doing it, there wasn't the international pool to draw on. I did a lot of Dungeons and Dragons work for Dawn Murin, who's now a magic art director as well. And I remember at one point she shifted over to another project that was a Japanese card game, and so she was actually working with some Japanese artists on that. And I just the cultural differences, just in terms of aesthetic, were fairly dramatic. So it's interesting to see how that influx of different cultures has changed the way that we do things. I would say that students getting into it now really need to think about, getting an account on ArtStation or something like that. And also really thinking of the client, looking at what the client is selling, and what kind of art the client is buying, and trying to work that way. I have students who, will have a portfolio full of anime or a book this thick full of anime stuff, and they want to do magic. And it's like, well, there may be assignments where that could come up, but you really need to look at what the client, whether it's Wizards or Blizzard or any other client, what type of art they're using, and try to imagine your work plugged into that, plugged into a card or plugged into a book cover. You can no longer expect that they're just going to see your inherent skill and just love you for that and hire you.
Right. Question about Last New Helion. Is it true that you were inspired by the Lorena Bobbitt case?
Yeah, it's there are these things called polychaetes, which are prehistoric worms, and they are terrifying. And they've been very similar for ages and ages. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them are really strikingly pretty, but they are these things that actually kind of back into the sediment at the bottom of the ocean, the kind that I was using for that, they colloquially called a Bobbitt Worm. They back into the ocean. They have these little triggers that sit sticking up out of the sand, and their jaws are just wide open. Picture some pruning shears that are sitting there like this with hooks on the end, like pruning shears from hell, like even worse. And they have these triggers, and as soon as something crosses those triggers, these jaws just slam shut, and it launches its mandibles kind of out of, and I'm using the term mandibles loosely, but it launches these up out of the ground and will scissor things in half. And there's some great stories, really getting off into the weeds here, but there's some interesting stories about aquariums where these things have gotten into a tank or come in on a baby has come in on some coral or something that they got from the wild, and all of a sudden they noticed their fish started to go missing. And it's inevitably one of these worms. And there was one that, and I want to say it was an aquarium in Australia or New Zealand or something, that, where they actually put in a trap with fish hooks and metal line and stuff like that to try and catch the thing because their fish were going missing. And they came in the morning and the trap was gone.
Ooh.
And there was still no sign of what it was. They had to dismantle the tank. And they found this worm that I want to say was several feet long. And I think they named it Barry and gave it its own tank. But nature is astonishing. It's really, really crazy. But yeah.
The stuff at the bottom of the ocean, I mean, like that stuff there's stuff that we have never and will never see.
Right. Well, that's another thing though. You look at some of this stuff, the skulls of fish are, I don't know if that's,
wow.
That is, so this is a mahi-mahi, they're called dolphin fish. And I left this one site unarticulated so I could look in at the details in there. And I don't have the gills on here, but they're so sophisticated compared to terrestrial mammals of any kind. They've been evolving, they're powerful. You look at tuna are armor plated. They have little bones in their skin. So they're really solid. And the things that eat them have to be able to get through that. So there's been this arms race going on in the ocean since way before anything really started to, vertebrates came up on land. It's all just really fascinating.
I don't do the ocean. I live in Florida. Not a fan because there's an underwater forest.
It's the shark's house.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, this the thought that like you see those prehistoric, especially the fish that have the built-in fake uh teeth to get the fish to bite on. I forget. It's like what's the name of the one that has the light
Well,
in front of it?
they're anglerfish, so there's a
Right.
whole, yeah, there's a whole group, and the jaws on those things are insane. Those are tiny, but the jaws on that whole group of fish are just, you know, the whole thing is they open up wide, and the jaws basically go out and grab stuff or create suction and pull things in.
Right, and then they're fighting all that water pressure. I mean, you know, it's like having to clamp down like that, fighting all that water pressure. I mean, like I'm sure they could take off a finger on us.
Oh, they're pretty tough. Yeah, and you know they're I don't know. It's a world where things have been evolving and getting scarier and scarier and more impressive since long before the dinosaurs even remotely came up on, you know, on land. So it's a place that needs respect. I will tell you, the Bobbitt worms are not generally in the kind of depths that people, you know, you go wading out into. So you're probably safe if you go out there. But if you ever go fishing, those bloodworms that people get for deep sea fishing or fishing in the ocean are polychaetes too. They're named because they have little spines coming off their sides. The whole family has groups of spines coming off the side that have little bits of toxin in them. So,
What's that spider on your jacket?
oh, it's just a black widow. This is my wife got me this because of the spider, I think. Yeah, it's something to do with the brand. I don't even know what the brand is, but
What is it about spiders that you love so much?
There's not well, I don't love horseflies, but pretty much I respect everything, like spiders. All animals in general, I think, are really pretty cool. I mean, if you think about it, they're all sort of evolved from some common ancestor way back when, and they're just like everything's just deviated a little bit to become something a little different. You look at I got turkeys in my backyard, and you look at those, and those are they're related to dinosaurs somewhere back there. You know, you imagine those 15 feet high.
And they'll mess you up in their small.
Yeah, they will. Yep, you'd be running for your life.
Yeah, like geese, like those things are.
Geese are. I've gotten beaten up pretty badly by, well, one goose in particular, but
yeah, it's like you forget, like, I mean, yeah, and when you think about it, I mean, anything huge is terrifying, but like a huge spider is definitely worse than, I'd say, a huge Shih Tzu. You know?
Yeah, that's probably yeah, that's probably true. Yeah.
I did get to meet this. Okay, so I don't have to censor this because this is legitimately what a guy had, but I kid you not, he had this giant Shih Tzu that was a bullshit. And I'm not joking. It had all the like attributes of a Shih Tzu, but the size of a bulldog. And I was blown away by this dog. Like, it was, imagine a Shih Tzu that was, you know, like 25 pounds.
Yeah. You make anything big enough and it can be terrifying.
And it was utterly bizarre because it for whatever reason, the DNA just hit the jackpot, and this thing was like, it looked like a Shih Tzu, but it the size of a bulldog.
And it's just maybe a mutation or something.
Yeah, it was bizarre. I was like, why are you not taking this out to the news? This is something that people will want to see. But he was like, I don't know. I don't want to.
I'm just going to enjoy my monster Shih Tzu on my own.
Right.
I respect that.
I guess there's a couple of questions I have left. One thing I wanted to ask about was Doomed Traveler. What was, because I do love the piece, but I'm not sure how to interpret what the Shadow is doing. What was the assignment? Because for me, I see the Shadow sort of like on his knees with his arms out, sort of like kind of not welcoming death, but or just sort of like, you know, like resigned to it.
That was a really tough one too, and that's another one that I would love to have another go at, just because there are things I would like to just try differently. The art director for that was Jeremy Cranford, and the Shadow was. It's interesting that you picked up on that, because that was one of the things that needed to be edited a couple of times. And originally the assignment was called Alms Taker, and it was to show somebody who was kind of beaten down and bedraggled, or Seeker, I think it was, something like that, who was walking along a road. And so I initially did this guy bent over with a staff, kind of in one of those little wooden boxes to get money, and he's kind of walking along the road. But the whole linchpin of the piece was that there was supposed to be this shadow hitting the wall behind him, and whether the arms were like this or like this, kind of accepting whatever fate delivered on him.
Right.
I think that was the intent, but the arm gestures were really subtle, and I have to give it to Jeremy Cranford. I wish any of the decisions I made on that were, he was really kind of fine tuning that one as I was doing it, and he knew what they were after, and so I adjusted that a couple of times based on his recommendation. But I think it really was just kind of this guy. So it ended up being this guy kind of coming back from some unknown war, and kind of resigned to whatever happened. And my thing in that was there's some little flowers, some little red flowers along the side of the road, and he's just taking a moment to kind of appreciate the beauty of those, those flowers in a fairly gloomy world. But those shadows, the light there was something that Jeremy was really very specific about what he wanted. And I think it was just kind of being resigned to whatever the fates delivered.
That's what I got from it. But it's one that you want to study it, because the card, it's interesting that it had a different name, but the fact that it's called that, you sort of look at it and it challenges you to create the narrative with your interpretation.
Yeah, and I think those are the best pieces too. And I think it's not all. I look at guys like Steve Belladin, who you've talked to before.
Yes.
And he has gotten in the past some of the hardest assignments. The kind of the ones that if I got them, I would just be tied up and I'd be crying in the corner of my studio, trying to figure out what I was going to do with them. But he's handled them very, very well. I think when you can set up some kind of a narrative that works with the viewer, where the viewer can have some input on the story based on their viewpoint, their personal viewpoint or their personal interests, that's the kind of ideal setting. And I do tend to do creatures, so most of the time it's things raging against you or something like that. But it amazes me when you get to do something like that. The piece, Tormod's Crypt behind you, was another example of a piece that ended up on the card being something different than what I actually painted. And that was something that I did in conjunction with the art director. Again, Jeremy. I'm trying to remember what the specific assignment was, but there was obviously Christopher Rush's job before. He had painted that before, and he had done an internal scene of the mausoleum. And I just could imagine this sort of cinematic thing where you had this empty, desolate landscape, and this thing just silently floating, this thing of rock just silently floating across with a little bit of this grave mist kind of trailing behind it. Utterly silent landscape, and this thing just sort of, under its own power, kind of moving across the landscape. And he's like, "Oh yeah, that's a cool idea, but it doesn't really fit. The card can't have flying." Basically, was
True. Okay.
So I said, "Well, can I just paint it bigger and you guys crop in and use what you want?" He was like, "Yeah, sure."
Although I will say, on your defense, there have been many cards made since then that they clearly should say flying on it, because some of them, I can't name names, but there are some cards where it's like, that's not flying. Like, it looks like flying. But
Yep.
It is cool that Tormod, it ended up being, and it's not, I'll have the full version up when we talk about it, but the fact that you ended up giving it the effect of like a floating effect with the mist coming out of it.
Yeah, there are very few paintings that I've sold that I wish I'd held on to, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
I look back at that, I'm like, it's just, there are paintings I've done that I like, there's paintings I've done that I don't like. That's one that I liked, and just still kind of it still hits an aesthetic thing that I like, that kind of gloomy horror movie kind of thing, but not scary horror movie, just gloomy.
Yeah, it's a gothic sort of H.P. Lovecraft kind of vibe.
Yep.
And I guess the final question would be, I'd like to know like how many paintings are you in for the upcoming sets? And what is the horizon for Magic for you?
Ooh, well, I think I'm not doing any of the next one up. I actually have some D&D work coming up, and I'm really I'm not oddly, but I'm very excited about that just because it's a change of pace and how the work is done. I do have some stuff in, I don't even know if I'm supposed to say.
Well, the sets have been announced, and so there have been other artists that talk about what sets they're going to be in. So I think you're allowed to say that if you're an Innistrad or in Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm pretty sure that it would be okay.
I've got pieces in both of those.
Okay, cool. I mean, I'd assume that you would have to be at least in D&D because with your background, it's like that would just be kind of like, huh?
Yeah, I got a couple of fun pieces I'm really excited about in D&D, and one in particular that I actually asked for, and the art director gave me, and so I'm really excited about just people's response to that.
Have you ever asked for one before?
I have. I don't always get what I ask for, but in this case, the art director was kind enough to give me just say, hey, well, what are you interested in this subject matter? And so I told him, and I got a couple pieces I'm very happy with.
Well, I know that we're all looking forward to it. Thank you so much again. This has been awesome. Like getting to see the real behind the scenes of your like your process and seeing all those crazy cool skulls. I mean, like it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
All right. You have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you all for watching the interview, and I would like to everybody, if you want to be entered into the giveaway that we do every video, just subscribe and comment and you will be entered. And until next time, I got a scoop.